Think of a young man, young family man, pretty wife, beautiful children, got great potential, great promise for future. But he develops a nagging pain in his back when he, and after a week or two of dealing with it, he decides he needs to go to the doctor, and he goes and he's informed that he has cancer. And it's of such nature that he's only got weeks to live. The treatment could prolong, it would only prolong it. You're going to die. So his future of decades, as he believes, is now limited to a few weeks. Why do things like that happen? Consider a woman who has been lovingly devoted to her husband, to her family, to her marriage for 26 years. Then one night she discovers her husband has been unfaithful. Not that night, but for years. And having been found out now, he wants a divorce. And I'd like for you to consider, feel this situation. These are real situations, real scenarios. Think about the agony that would seize this woman. It just all of a sudden comes to her, and she has been faithfully devoted all these years, not out of duty, but because she loves her husband, she loves her family, and then all of this and all the disruption that it's going to cause in her home and in her life for the rest of her life. Why do things like this happen? And then there's the father. He loves his children. He's trained he's done everything he can to train them to be good, moral people, to be good citizens. He rears them into the best of his ability and the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. He teaches them about God. He teaches them about the grace of God, the love of God, the forgiveness of God, the cross of Christ. He would stand before Satan himself to protect his children. But as they've grown up and gone out and are in their middle ages of life, they turn from God. They lead lives of rebellion and immorality, and they bring disgrace upon the family and the church and God. Why do good fathers have disobedient children? Why do good parents experience this kind of pain and suffering, and then there are other parents who do not? Feel for a moment the mother who bore 3 children, spent her life rearing and loving those children, only to receive a phone call one night telling her that all 3 of her teenagers had been killed in an automobile accident by a drunk driver. They weren't guilty. They were just hit. Why do these tragedies happen? As horrible as these scenarios are, they are life's realities. They stink. They hurt. And if you've experienced any of these things, you probably don't like the way this thought is going. I would ask you to consider these ugly pictures because, as a preacher, if that's the profession you choose to take, one day it's not going to be a scenario presented to you. What are you going to do about that? It's going to be some woman at your doorstep. You as her preacher. Maybe she sees you as her pastor, as her counselor, as her guide in life. She comes to you and she asks you these questions. You're going to have that conversation with some 40-year-old woman, twice divorced, who has tried to raise her kids right, but she lost them to the world, or maybe she lost them to her husband's lavish gifts. and she says to you, I quit believing in God. I've done what's right all my life. What has it got? I've had those conversations. And if you choose this profession, you choose this way of life, it's likely you'll have that conversation. It'll be a conversation about faith. It'll challenge your faith because they'll ask questions that are hard to answer. If our faith in God cannot help us come to grips with such issues, our faith is not a faith for real life. It's a church building faith, a Christianity faith. And I don't mean to demean that. I'm just saying that we can't get our faith out of the church building, off the pew, and into real life. If it doesn't work in real life for us, and it's not going to work for them, and we're going to have a hard time convincing them that there is a God in heaven who loves, who cares. All of us want to be the optimistic Pollyanna who would love to not see any negative things in life and only see the positive. But sometimes life happens. And it happens so hard and so fast that we can't find anything to be glad about. It's really, really hard. So what we need is a faith that can make sense out of what seems so senseless. We need God to answer the whys of our life. And we need a God that will answer them. Is he the cause of this suffering? Are all the bad things that happen in this life, all the bad consequences that happen in this life, are they happening only to bad people? Am I one of those bad people because bad things are happening to me? I don't think I'm a bad person. Talking to a teenager recently that she doesn't understand. How are these people going to go to hell? They do good things. They're not bad people. God punish us whether we're righteous or wicked? Someone might ask. Why do bad things happen to people that we believe are good people? There's a lot of ways, a lot of questions, a lot of things that factors that come into those questions. It's not always just yes and no or black and white. Sometimes the definition of good is the problem. My young friend who says all these good people, I can't believe they're going to go to hell. How does she qualify good? Well, she thinks that because this person does good things for people, even though he has or she has rejected God, she has chosen to be a homosexual and rejecting God's word. But she does good things. She helps little old ladies across the street or whatever, or she gives to the homeless or whatever. Because they do good things, because they don't kill, because they don't steal, because they're not, in her definition of good, they're not bad, then they're not going to go to hell. Maybe her problem is not understanding what hell is, what heaven is, not understanding what a relationship with God is. There's all kinds of factors that need to be considered as we answer those questions. And in this, the questions that I've posed before you, they're not always easy. They're not always black and white. They're not always going to be as easy as you might want them to be. You sin, you go to hell. If you murder, you get the consequences. Well, that's easy. That's how things. Those are easy answers, but the questions aren't always that easy. And that's the case with the book of Job. It presents to us a question that's not easy. The text starts out, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God, one who shunned evil. But this is God's estimation of this person. This is not Job writing this about Job. This is God writing this about Job. Now, I believe that Job did write this. I think this was written many years after the experience, and it's written, most of it, in a poetic form. So The dialogues that take place here in the book, they take place in poetry, as we have discussed already. I believe we discussed this, or maybe there's something we need to discuss. When you read poetry, Shakespeare, Psalms, whoever, poetry is something that is planned ahead of time. Something that it's language that you write down because you have figured a way to write this language down. This is not prose. Is when we're just like talking a dialogue, having conversation back and forth. We don't speak in rhymes. We don't speak to each other in flowing, rhyming or rhythmic language. We speak whatever comes out, and most of us aren't intelligent enough to speak poetically. And if we were intelligent enough to speak poetically, people would think we're weird for one thing. They wouldn't comprehend half what we said, because to read poetry, you've got to be ready to read it. And to speak poetry, you have to be prepared to speak it or to write it. Well, most of the book of Job is written in poetry, which tells us he's not writing it down as it takes place. This is all taking place, and Job is, by inspiration, putting it down on paper, and he puts it down in the form of a song, or a form of a large poem. It's considered the best poetry in all of history. But we need to consider that this is something Job wrote. If it was Job who wrote it, it was somebody else writing about Job. But in this first verse here, what we have here is a declaration of God. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. He was blameless and upright, and he feared God and shunned evil. Then it's important to see that the entire book of Job is founded upon the premise that Job is a righteous person, righteous before God. Not self-righteous, not self-proclaimed righteous. He's righteous before God. God blessed Job with every imaginable blessing because of his pure and upright life. Or maybe he just blessed Job irregardless of his pure and upright life. He blessed Job. Job was a blessed person. Look, read it. Job chapter 1, verse 2. And seven sons and 3 daughters were born to him. He blessed richly with a wonderful family. And all his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, or he had many servants in his home. So this man was the greatest of all the people of the East, and his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Therefore Job did regularly. So this kind of gives us a time frame for the book of Job. There's nothing in here that describes the law of Moses and the sacrificial system of the law of Moses. This is more of a patriarchal system. It tells us that this book of Job, or the events of the book of Job, take place before Mount Sinai, before the Exodus, before the 10 Commandments, and before the covenant there. And so most scholars would put this somewhere in the time frame of Abraham. It could be prior to Noah, but I would figure it's somewhere in that time frame between Noah and Abraham, or maybe shortly thereafter. It could be there's a several hundred-year span between Noah and Moses at Mount Sinai, and I think Job took place somewhere in there. And the events here in the text kind of help us understand that or see that. But at any rate, he enjoyed every blessing from God. He had children, he had herds, he had flocks, he had servants, he had great wealth, and he doesn't take these things for granted. He was ever mindful of his blessings, and he was a good steward, seemingly, of them both physically and spiritually. He offered sacrifices for his children just in case they had sinned. For a long period, Job had lived with and had come to depend upon the blessings of God, the graciousness of God in his life, and he enjoyed those blessings, but he didn't take them for granted. But then one day, you might say it's the worst day of Job's life. And some critics here say that this has got to be fictitious. This is not going to happen. And that one survivor comes from each of these events except for one, and they all come back with the same statement. Well, there's a couple things to consider there. It may be that it did not happen all in one day, that Job is just recording this as if it happened all in one day. And it may be that they didn't all say exactly the same thing when they came and reported it. This is just Job's way of writing it down in the poetic form or in the song form or in the recording form of it. He's digested it for us. We also have to consider that something that Job doesn't know in the book. He does know it after the book, but Job kind of leaves himself, as he writes this book, he leaves himself, if he's the writer, he leaves himself ignorant of the fact that you and I can see. And that is that there's an unseen dialogue taking place between, dialogue, I suppose, taking place between Satan and God. And Satan, or Job, on the earthly side, doesn't see this taking place. And so it could be very possible that all of this happened just as it's recorded. Boom, 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 boom. One after another. That may be, and I think it is, actually part of the story that it happened. Boom, 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 boom. It didn't happen over 20 years or 30 years. It happened all of a sudden. Hell rained down all at once. So the worst day of Job's life, we'll take it in that perspective. In Job verses 13 through 22, it tells of the tragedies that suddenly fell upon Job, swallowing up his wealth, his family, all in one day. Raiding parties come and steal his livestock, steal his servants. Fire comes from heaven and burns up the flocks. A mighty wind comes and topples the house down where his sons and daughters were eating together, and no survivor of the children was had. Job's response to all of this, and it's happening, boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden, his response is almost unbelievable. Verse 20, it says, "And Job arose, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, he fell to the ground, and he worshipped." Most people at this point are shaking their fist at God. Job is falling prostrate to the ground and he worships. And he says, naked, and this is why some people don't believe this is a real thing, because no one will do this. But Job did. Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Before you get too cynical here and say that did not happen, like this is a fairy tale, this is just a parable that God is telling to help us understand something. When you turn to the book of 1 Peter, well, the first word you find there is praise God. That we need to be praising God. The word there for praise is the word that we get our word eulogy from. Eulogize God. Say good words about God. Even if you're going through a fiery trial, we have all the reason in the world to say good words about God. And Peter gives us a list of things that concerns our spiritual welfare as to why we should say good words about God, even if we're going through a fiery trial, even if we're next with our head on the chopping block, even for the next one being thrown to the lions, say good words about God. And Job here is an example of that. He doesn't curse God. His wife eventually tells him, curse God and die. Stop the suffering. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord giveth, and the Lord protects. Blessed be the name of the Lord. But Satan's not done. In chapter 2, it speaks of the suffering that is described in greater detail throughout the rest of the book, but it tells us the essence of it here. You can see this if you go into, in reality, you can see this in third world hospitals. People suffering like this. I've been to hospitals where I have to walk away. I have to walk out. I can't imagine. I don't want to be in that place where such suffering is taking place and such contemptible ugliness as far as the flesh is concerned. Festering sores all over his body, scabs, leaving black scars, and he's so disfigured that when his friends come to find him, they can't even recognize who he is. fever, loss of appetite, constant pain, cannot sleep, cannot take a breath hardly. In fact, he's told in uh, chapter 19, I believe it is, that he has bad breath, halitosis. He's so miserable that he curses the day he was born. I can't wait to die. But still, he does not sin. Chapter 2, verse 9 says, Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept the good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. Can you see how he did not take advantage or did not take improper advantage of God? He did not take God for granted. Shall we receive blessings from God and not adversity? It all comes. Now, he maybe has a poor view of God because he can't see all that's taking place, and that's one of the answers and one of the things that God actually says to Job at one time. And you don't know everything that you think you know. You have this perception of God, and while it's not necessarily a bad perception, it's not a complete perception. So when he says, shall we accept good from God and not adversity, that's true, but some of the things that we receive in this life are not from God, and maybe Job doesn't fully comprehend. At any rate, in the next 35 chapters, you find the record of Job's struggle to try to make sense out of his suffering. What he said to his wife is his feeling, but still, I don't get it, he says, what he's thinking. Job is not trying to find fault with God. He's not tempted to turn back on God, but he just doesn't get it. I don't understand God, he says. Why would God rain so much suffering down on his most devoted of followers? He's not saying that in pride, but he is understanding that I don't live my life in sin. I live according to the Spirit. I walk with the Spirit, as he would say in New Testament terms. So I don't understand why I'm getting all of this. I understand adversity. I understand getting or having problems in my life from time to time, or having adversity from time to time, and being tried from time to time. But I don't understand all of this. And so he's confused. And he must respond to this. I don't understand why a righteous man should be tortured rather than blessed. Job's friends are introduced at this point. He has 3 friends, and then one who wasn't so much a friend. He's not really qualified as a friend anyway. Like who comes in later, a young man, and he tries to, in Job 4, tries to tell Job, this is the way things are. He's kind of boastful and prideful, and he doesn't really add anything to the conversation, in my opinion. He just repeats what the other 3 have said. But they come for the purpose, the 3 friends do, for the purpose of comforting Job. Verse 11, it says, chapter 2, Now when Job's 3 friends heard all this adversity had come upon him, each one of them came to his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. When they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust upon his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. They were so flabbergasted at what they saw. All they could do was fall down and cry. For a whole week, they just mourned together with Job. It was an attempt to, I suppose, sympathize with him, but the sympathy degenerates really into a shouting match over the next several chapters that insists that his friends are insisting that Job, bad things don't happen to good people. What you do, though, you've done something to tick off the gods. They didn't say gods. This is a book that doesn't include paganism. It's an address to God. So what did you do to make God mad? All three of these men were believers in God. Their conception of God was not complete, not full. And I want you to, as you think about the book of Job, or read the book of Job, or read some of the things that have been said about the book of Job, or some of the quotations that come from the book of Job, be careful how you quote Job. Because a lot of the things said in the book of Job were said by men whose concept of God was not complete or not correct. And sometimes we'll quote a passage of scripture or quote a passage or scripture out of its context, and it wasn't God who said that, nor was it God condoning what was said. It was simply that man's thought about who God is or the way God is, and it wasn't the correct thought, but that it's a recorded thought. That makes sense. But these men, they believe that when you see people suffer, it means they're getting what they deserve. And it was a common way of thinking, still a common way of thinking today. You reap what you sow. That's basically the idea behind the men's philosophy, and it's true. I mean, Paul would say that very same thing. You reap what you sow. You sow the wind, you'll reap the whirlwind. But sometimes what you are reaping is not what you have sown. And that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, especially in the book of Job. So don't take an idiomatic proverb, to reap what you sow, and apply it to every situation, because it's not. Jesus in the New Testament, you find the man was born blind, and somebody will ask him, was he born blind because of something he did or something his parents did? But who is the one who did the reaping of what this man is sowing? Jesus says, neither one. This man was born blind for the glory of God. What does that mean? Well, we'll get a chance to talk about that passage in the book of John. We'll do that. But basically, he was saying that this man was born blind so that I could show the glory of God to you through him at this point. When you're wicked, God punishes. That's the idea. When you're being punished, therefore, it's because you've done something wicked. And so all this was, Job's suffering was proof you've done something bad. Eliphaz says it this way. Remember now, Job chapter 4, verse 7. Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or whatever, where were the upright ever cut off? Even as I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By blast of God they perish, and the breath of his anger, or by the breath of his anger they are consumed. It's not like hellfire and brimstone preacher. Well, that's really what he was. He was giving it to Job, who, you're only getting what you deserve. You've done something, secret or whatever. You've done something, and the blast of God's nostrils is against you. Bildad, he's sort of the philosopher of the bunch. He says in chapter 8, inquire, please, of the former age, and consider the things discovered by their fathers. For we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words from their heart? Can the prayer of papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can reeds flourish without water? While it is yet green and not cut down, it withers before any other plant. So are the paths of those who forget God, and the hope of the hypocrite shall perish. Whose confidence shall be cut off, and whose trust is a spider's web? So he's basically saying the same thing when he puts a little more eloquence to it. He doesn't give the hellfire and brimstone. He's given a philosopher's perspective of you reap what you sow. Zophar, he a little more blunt than the other two. He says, should not your, Job chapter 11, verse 3, should your empty talk make men hold their peace? In other words, just because you say it's so, Job, isn't so. You're talking empty, and should I not say anything when you're speaking so sillily? Should your empty talk make men hold their peace, or when you mock, should no one rebuke you? For you have said, my doctrine is pure, I am clean in your eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips against you, that he would show you the secrets of wisdom. That he would, for they would double your prudence. Know therefore that God expects from you less than your iniquity deserves. So these are what his friends are saying. With friends like that, who needs enemies? So they weren't being ugly to Job. They're just saying, Job, you need to repent. If you want to fix this problem, you need to go to God, make sacrifices or whatever. If you need to repent of whatever it is that you've done, quit hiding it. Quit saying that you didn't do it. Well, Job, he doesn't buy it. He knows his life. He believes he knows God, and so he doesn't buy this concept of God. He says things are more complicated than that. Suffering is not. The book of Job helps us understand, or Job was trying to help us understand in the book of Job. Suffering is not so neatly packaged. There are times when things get turned around, apparently, when the very people who should be punished are the ones who are prospering, the ones who are should be prospering, the ones who are bearing God's punishment. I don't understand why it is, Job says. But that's the way it is. That's the way God is sovereign, and he can make those decisions. He can cause the good people to suffer. He can cause the bad people not. And that's really not to go off in that direction. That's kind of how the Calvinist looks at God. That he is sovereign. He can make whatever decision he wants. And the Calvinist says, God picked these people to be saved. God picked these people to be lost. It's his sovereign decision. And you can't blame God. You can't say anything bad about God when he made that decision, because it's his sovereign will. He is sovereign. You can't question him. If he wants to make all these people be saved and all these people be lost, and they have no option in the matter, that's God's deal. That's God's business. Well, that's kind of how Job is looking at God, and Job will be corrected in that view. Why do the wicked live on, Job says, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them and their offspring before their eyes. They spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace, Job 21, verses 7 to 13. Job, defending his treasured relationship with God, he says, I'm just an example of a righteous man who nonetheless suffers. He says in chapter 23, verse 11, my foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way. I have not turned aside. I have not departed from his commandments or the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. But he is unique. And who can make him change? And whatever his soul desires, that's what he does. For he performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. Therefore I am terrified of his presence. When I consider this, I am afraid of him. When I consider a God like that, I'm afraid of him too. If his sovereign will is used in such a way, and I'm not saying that God is not sovereign, he is. But if he uses his sovereign will in unjust ways, like the Calvinists describe that he does, how can I trust a sovereign God who tells me to treat people justly and with fairness, and yet he does differently? Unless the picture of Job is coming of God and he's not doing it maliciously, it's just the best way he can come to understand it. He's confused. He knows that God is one who blesses, and he's the one who punishes, but he thinks God should maybe take more care about choosing who he blesses and whom he punishes. And so the only answer that Job can come up with is God is complicated, that we really can't understand the way he works, that he treats people any way he wants to, and because he's bigger than we are, he doesn't have to justify his actions. How can I answer him, he says in chapter 9, verse 14. How then can I answer him and choose my words to reason with him? For though I were righteous, I could not consider him, or could not answer him. I would beg mercy of my judge. In chapter 9, verse 21, he says, I am blameless, yet I do not know myself. I despise my life. It's all one thing. Therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. If the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of his judges. If it is not he, who else could it be? So his understanding of God is that he does what he wants to. If I receive cursing, it's from God. Now, it's not because I've done evil. It's just because he's God, and he can do that if he wants to. So no wonder Job is afraid of him if that's his concept of God. I would be afraid of God if that's my concept of God. And the interesting thing is, and I guess this is really what God is wanting us to see about Job in this book, and it's the thing that commends Job to God in this book, is even though Job has a wrong concept of God, he did not turn his back. Even when he couldn't figure God out, and even when his figuring of God out was bad, as far as incorrect, he didn't turn his back on God. He knew that God would eternally reward those who faithfully walk with him, even though he doesn't really comprehend why God is doing things in this way. So what is the answer? Is Job, or is Job's God like Job thinks he is? Or is Job's God like Job's friends think he is? Job hasn't always thought this way about God. Before the calamity, he had never really considered that we must receive adversity from God. We receive gifts from him, so we must receive adversity from him. Before the adversity came, however, all he thought is that we receive blessings from God. The fact of the matter is that Job, for all of his qualities, was bad at math, you might say. He didn't consider all the factors, or maybe not considering all the factors is not the right way to say it. He didn't know all the factors. Job was indeed suffering in spite of his righteousness. He got that part right. And all that Job's friends had told him was true. God does punish the wicked, and God does reward the righteous. But there's something that Job didn't know, didn't consider. And that is that there's a Satan in the picture. Nobody took this into account. Maybe they didn't know about Satan, but nobody took this into account. But it's recorded for us at the first of the book. And you got to consider that although we have this prologue, this introduction to the book, as the story plays out in the remainder of the book, the people who are the characters in the story don't know what we know from the first part of the book. Here's what we know that Job, in the story, in the details of the book, doesn't know. Verse 6, chapter 1, verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan from among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth and walking back and forth upon it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now, if you will stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay hands on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now this passage gives a lot of commentators, a lot of critics, a lot of fodder to deal with. We're not going to go into that part of it. That's a theological discussion that you will have as you study the book of Job, and you should have that study. This is an introductory work, so we're not going to delve into that. What is Satan doing in heaven? What is Satan doing in the conversation, or God doing in the conversation with Satan? What is God doing, allowing Satan to do these things? And so those are interesting conversations that we need to have, but we just don't have the opportunity in this class to do that. Job, the book, does not only deal with as a person, Job does not only deal with a God who loves righteousness, but we come to find out here that he deals with a Satan who hates it, even though he might not know that that's who he's dealing with. He sees God. He sees things spiritually, talking about God. He doesn't consider Satan. The goodness of Job is a point of, you might say, pride for God. God says, have you considered my servant Job? Satan is walking around the world trying to find things about which to accuse me. He finds old Mike Underwood and says, look at this guy, God. This guy's worthless. He's no good to you. He needs to go to hell. What about this guy over here, God? He's worthless and no good. He goes around accusing. That's what he does. He accuses us. We have our lawyer, our defense lawyer, Jesus Christ. Now, this is really the theological part of the book. We have Jesus Christ as our spokesman, as the one who stands before God and says, I have taken his sin, Father. He's one of ours. And Satan is silenced. His accusations are voiceless because Jesus has taken our sins and he has nailed them to the cross, Paul says in the book of Colossians 2, verse 14. So that's how this book deals with Christ in the New Testament. But Job doesn't know all of this. The suffering that results in the life of righteous Job don't come from the hand of God, but from Satan. You might say it comes from God and that God allowed it to take place, and that would be a good argument to make. But you got to understand the principle behind it. Why is this taking place? In chapter 2, it says, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered, Lord, I'm going to and fro on the earth, walked about back and forth in it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? But there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. This is after what took place in chapter 1, after all the calamity that Satan brought upon Job, or God allowed to happen to Job. He still says, here's a man who is blameless, upright, and fears God and shuns evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with painful boils from his shoulders to his head. The pattern is repeated. It's Satan, not God, who's causing the suffering of Job, but God is allowing it to take place. Why do men suffer? God causes sometimes suffering because of his hatred of evil. God punished people with leprosy for their evil deeds. God punished people with earthquakes and plague, devastation because of their evil. God hates evil and he punishes it sometimes. That's how he deals with it sometimes. If all we see, however, is this part of God, then we must understand that if Job is suffering, it's because God is punishing him doing evil. But that's not the only picture there is given to us of God. Satan causes people to suffer out of his hatred for good. You got the people in the Colosseum of Rome who were dying because they were good. Peter speaks about people about suffering, even though your works are good. People will speak all manner of evil against you falsely for his name's sake, for Christ's name's sake. Satan is alive and well. Sometimes what happens to people is a result of his hatred of good. We suffer not because God is punishing us, but because Satan is punishing, you might say, good. The encouragement in this situation in the Bible, throughout the Bible, is to endure. Don't give up. Don't give up for the. Paul says that the tribulations that we suffer in this life are not worthy to be compared with the glory that we shall receive. Don't give up. Don't quit. Even though it's going to get bad, don't quit. Job suffers not because of God, but because of Satan. But God does allow it because he has confidence in Job. But Job is suffering because of his righteousness, not in spite of it. There are other reasons people suffer. If I take in mind to kidnap and torture you and cause you to suffer, it's because I'm evil, not because you are evil. If I'm a doctor and I accidentally inject you with the wrong kind of medicine that causes you to suffer, you suffer because of my ignorance, not because of something that you did. It's not the intent of the teaching here to list all the ways that people can suffer and investigate all of them as to why that particular suffering. But there are many reasons why people suffer. So as you have that conversation with that 40-year-old lady twice divorced and losing her kids to the lavish gifts of her husband or to the immorality of the world, there's not just one thing. We're going to have to take in all considerations of the story to maybe discern what's taking place, and it's going to have to take place in more than one conversation. Oftentimes, she's not going to want to have more than one conversation. She can just tell you what for, you and your God what for, and I'm good, and I'm out of here. She doesn't want to hear any of the answers. She's already made it tonight. So you have to be prepared for that and have to know that there's not just one answer, and there are things in the situation that you may not know. Maybe she's twice divorced because she's a horrible person to try to get along with. Maybe she's an evil mother. We're not going to go into the blame game here, but you have to consider there's more than one side to every story, and there was more than one side. This story, Job was righteous, but there was a side of the story that Job was not aware of, and his friends weren't aware of. When they make all these accusations against Job, they just don't know the whole story. And when Job he's not accusing God, so to speak, so much as just, I don't understand why you're this way. I accept that you're this way, but I don't think you're evil for being this way, but I just don't understand why you're this way. And that's sort of what the book of Job, or what Job is doing in the book. Even though he was confused, even though he patiently waited on God, he knew God was his Redeemer. He knew that he would someday see God face to face, and he would understand. Now, God's part of the book, or at least in the dialogue, when he speaks to Job finally, he basically says, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I did this, and this? Did I counsel you? Did I come to you for counsel? You don't have the right to question me on these things. Now, there is the sovereignty of God being preached by God himself. But God, in his defense of his sovereignty, God does not do unjust things, such as what the Calvinists would say that God does. God's actions, according to Calvinistic doctrine, are unjust. They are unfair. God's actions in Job are not unfair. God's actions in Job are to show that Job was as good as God believed that he was. Whatever is happening on the other side of the veil that we can't see, I know that God is not unjust. And yet, the Calvinists would say, well, he is unjust according to man's standards, but not according to his own standards. Well, God can't impose upon us. It would not be right, in my understanding, for God to impose upon us a different standard than he holds himself to as far as justice. Here's justice for you, but I don't have to abide by it. God is there. That sounds like the Pharisees. And Jesus didn't have much respect for the Pharisees for that very reason. In fact, he told them, you do what they say, but they won't move one finger to do it. A hypocrite. People of God, though we suffer from time to time, we must trust God. We must trust that he'll be righteous, that he will be according to his own will, his own determination, righteous. And so I defy and deny Calvinism's effort to say what God has done in his sovereignty. But God is sovereign. And God says that in the book of Job. He says, that's his answer to Job. I am sovereign. I don't have to tell you what I'm doing. You're not my superior. I don't report to you. But at the same time, the theology of God that we find in the Bible would forbid God from imposing upon Job or any other person a justice that he does not hold himself to. The book of Job, people miss it because they don't understand God. They don't understand Satan. They don't understand how God interacts with this world. And that's what Job is telling us, that we need to consider all the aspects of God, not just one or two. And don't think that you know all the answers just because you have a theology that you have formed in your mind. Don't think that you know all the answers. We need to continue to depend upon God. Book of Job, an interesting book. I hope you have benefited from at least this cursory glance at it. And well, that's what we have for the book of Job. And we'll continue this next week. Hopefully, we'll have to wrap it up next week because next week is the last week. So thank you for your attention.